hold my chai. Andrew pays for the Zoom membership, so that's why he can live broadcast it to Facebook.
What does that cost?
I think you're. Or maybe not.
Pub account. Sweet. Okay.
All right, we're on
Thanks,
Facebook.
Cool.
Okay. Thanks, Andrew.
You got it.
Love you.
Thank you. Okay. So, welcome everybody. Today we're going to be talking about some psychedelic history. Here, that's mine. Got my chai. We made chai for this, so we're ready. So we're going to be talking about MDMA, ibogaine, and LSD. And yeah, we'll get right to it. Which one do you want to start with, Dave?
So we decided to discuss ibogaine, LSD, and MDMA because there's quite a few things about them that people are not aware of, and we just kind of wanted to get that out to the public. So I think I'll start with LSD, which I believe has the most recorded history. So there was a chemist named Albert Hofmann who worked for Sandoz Pharmaceuticals in the early 1930s, and he had been working with a number of ergot-derived compounds, and LSD-25, dextrolisergic acid diethylamide 25, as we know as LSD acid Lucy, was the 25th compound that he had created, and I believe he made it in 1941 and then actually put it away for a few years. And then for some reason, and there's an article on Arrowhead, there's speculation on how this happened, but he went back to his lab, he got the LSD that he had created earlier, and he had synthesized it, played around with it, and there's a theory that he got some of it he either got it on his hand and ingested it, although it's been disproven that you can absorb LSD through your hand. If your hands can't absorb rain that's coming down when it's falling on you, you're not going to be able to absorb some LSD that's on a piece of blotter paper or in freebase or hydrochloride form or crystal form. And so he initially had his first trip on April 16th, 1943, when he had, there's two different stories. There's the one that he got some on his fingers, and then there's the theory that's actually on Arrowhead where he actually did not ingest any LSD that day, and he actually had a spiritual experience which had happened out of the consciousness, out of the universe, and he actually did not ingest any actual LSD that day, but it led him to begin a trial 3 days later on April 19th, 1943, which we all now celebrate as Bicycle Day. And on April 19th, 1943, he took 250 micrograms of LSD, and he started tripping, and he rode his bike home. I believe they didn't have cars during that time because of the war. I think everyone rode bikes. I'm pretty sure that was in Switzerland. And I think they still ride bikes there. And when he went home, he thought that milk might be the possible antidote, because at that point he was tripping pretty hard and starting to see monsters and kind of freaking out. And after a few hours, the effects had subsided, and that was the very first person to ever ingest LSD. And then later on, we had Owsley Stanley, who was the sound man for the Grateful Dead, who I believe cooked over 1 million doses. And LSD is not an easy synthesis. And so he was creating LSD, and it was being distributed throughout the areas that the Grateful Dead traveled. And the Grateful Dead were pretty much the source of LSD until they stopped touring. And now there's different families that supposedly distribute it, but it's believed that there's not more than a dozen or 24 people in the world who synthesize LSD. And that actually brings us to a chemist with the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, William Leonard Picard, who was...
It's a wild story, this guy.
Yeah. You want to talk about it a little bit?
I want to hear you tell the story.
So William, he was a Harvard trained. He went to Harvard. He went to a bunch of top schools, and he got a graduate degree or a master's degree, an advanced degree at Harvard School of Policy. He was actually studying fentanyl in Russia in the 90s, and he predicted what we have now known as the, what's up, Peaches? As the fourth wave of the, as they call it, the opioid crisis, or as I like to refer to it, the overdose crisis. And so I don't even know where to start with this guy. So he got involved with the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, and he started cooking LSD in California, and then I believe in Aspen when California criminalized LSD, and then I believe the Staggers-Dodds Act, that might have just been psilocybin, but then he moved to Colorado, and all of this is available in a very, very hard to read book. You know what it's called?
It's his book that he wrote, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it's called though.
Chrysanthemum or something like that.
I'm not positive. That sounds like it could be.
So there's a book that he published a few years ago that you can find. That's actually should be in our library. So that's something that we'll work on. Mm-hmm. It's a very hard read. Our good friend Riley Capps actually did an interview on it, and he actually talked to him back when William was incarcerated. I believe he got 2 life sentences. So to sum it all up, he's cooking a ton of LSD. He gets involved with this guy, Todd Gordon Skinner, who is just basically a con artist, but he worked as security for the Brotherhood of Eternal Love, and he conned William Leonard Picard into believing that he would be able to fund William's researched and claimed that he had all this money, and he did actually have 2 missile silos which were rented under his mom's. She owned like a spring manufacturing company, and so he basically had everything on credit from this through his mom's spring manufacturing company, when really he was broke as shit. And he claimed to be a crazy chemist, but I believe all that he could actually do was extract DMT. And he was a DEA informant. One of his uncles, when he was growing up, was involved with either with the FBI, and he had someone overdose at his silo. And to get out of trouble, he calls up the DEA and says, "Hey, I have someone who's manufacturing 90% of the world's supply of LSD," which William Leonard Picard was allegedly selling for about 25 cents per hit, wholesale cost, to 1 or 2 people, I believe. And so you can look up the whole thing. William eventually got busted after they had set up the lab, and they were driving from Wamego, Kansas on the highway, and his partner, Clyde Apperson, had been hired just to dismantle the glassware. And he got caught. I think he got a 20-year life sentence. William actually outran the cops and hid in a field nearby. I believe he was caught sleeping in a barn or in a truck. But he eventually got arrested and was convicted.
Did someone comment there was a shakedown?
Shakedown.
But he did get convicted, and then further evidence came out against the person who was working in the missile silo, that there was like a weird torture case with one of his girlfriends and her like.
He was dating this girl. She's kind of widely known in the psychedelic community. She has a YouTube channel, Neurosoup, I believe. And she also has a book. And I don't believe half the stuff that she says, but she was involved with the torture of a guy that she had been dating named Brandon Green. And they took him to a hotel, injected him with psychedelics. They were like doing things to his penis. And give me one sec.
Lots of weird shit. And I think that they ended up like trying to dump him in a field, thinking he was going to die, but he didn't.
Yeah, so this guy who was involved, William Hawk, I believe, who had been hired to help out with it, dumped him a couple feet from a field, like over by the border in Texas. And they did the kidnapping thing at a DoubleTree. And while they were doing that kidnapping, I believe he also met with DEA agents at the same time. And he believed that they had granted him an immunity when he testified against William Leonard Picard. So he believed that he had immunity to do whatever the hell he wanted, whenever the hell he wanted, and that they couldn't prosecute him. And so the boy, Brandon, eventually, as he's beaten and has been injected with psychedelics and different substances, and just all this craziness has happened to him for about a week. He crawls to the street, and a sheriff or a police officer or someone eventually finds him, and they eventually busted Todd Skinner. And William is now free to this day.
The chemist.
Yeah.
Yeah, the chemist is.
He got released, compassionate release because of COVID. I want to say maybe in May, maybe it was in June or August or something. But this year he got released when he had 2 life sentences Basically, I think they didn't want to pay for all of his health conditions that he was dealing with, and if he caught COVID, then it was just going to be too much of a liability. And
So that's a fun part of history with LSD. That's a great fun part of LSD history.
and now there's probably couple people who have taken after Leonard who are quietly supplying the rest of the United States and Europe and the world with LSD, but it's just a few people.
Yay. Shout out to those people.
So you
Much
want to talk
love.
about MDMA?
Sure. So I learned a little bit on MDMA. Of course, there's quite a lot of history, and I can't go over all of it because I don't know all of it because I wasn't there, but I will share what I do know. Okay. So, Sasha Shulgin is credited for making MDMA pretty well known throughout the psychedelic community, and
he's known as the godfather of MDMA.
He's synthesized quite a few psychedelics and is known as the godfather of MDMA. And fill in as necessary. Dave is like the most well-educated person on substances that I know. So
I just spent most of high school on Arrowhead.
So.
And then most of college editing Arrowhead.
So, Sasha Shulgin explained that he rediscovered MDMA in 1976, but MDMA was present prior to 1976 because in the early 1970s, around 1971, there were DEA records showing that MDMA was seized in a raid in Chicago and Detroit area. So somehow it was present around there during that time, but there's not much documentation as to who is using it, what it was used for, but it does have presence that it was there. That's the only documentation. And then in 1976, Shulgin started documenting his own personal experiences with it in his book Pical. However, Shulgin has explained that somebody had mentioned to him how to, so MDMA is, first off, you have MDA, and then from MDA, you can create MDMA by adding a methylated version to it. Correct. Okay. So, for a long time, Shulgin was like, I don't remember who did this. People in his network couldn't remember who told him to add the methylated version until recently it was uncovered that it was a person who was named Karl Resnikov. And that person was a student of Shulgin's at UC Berkeley, and he was a student in his toxicology course. And Karl Resnikov, during that course, approached Shulgin and asked him if they would like to further their research. And in that furtherment of their research, he recommended that they add the methylated, or they add the methyl to the MDA to make MDMA. And that was in 1975. And so Shulgin got away with it at the university because he explained that they were using the university labs to create the street versions of a lot of the street substances that you would see, and find incoherencies in those that could be dangerous for other people. So the university accepted that research, and in that research, they synthesized MDMA. And Karl Resnikov and a woman named Judith at the time had the first documented MDMA experience on a ferry ride. And they had 125 milligrams, which is currently considered the therapeutic dose. It's a little bit higher than the standard dose today. But
which really should be, I believe, 2 milligrams per kilogram. So you go based off your weight.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So sounds like they had a fun time. He went back, told Shulgin about it a few weeks afterwards. And then Shulgin didn't have an experience for himself until about a year later. And unfortunately, he didn't have the empathogenic experience that a lot of people describe with psychedelics. And he didn't feel that like universal love and connectedness with it, but he understood how other people have felt that. And so he did endorse, well, I wouldn't say he endorsed the substance, but he did talk about the substance in that way, how other people would feel about it. And his wife, Anne, really did enjoy it. However, Anne and Sasha Shulgin never took MDMA together. So it's just kind of interesting to see how the drug of love, the person who created the drug of love, never used it with the love of his life. But it's still a really beautiful substance nonetheless. What else do we have here? It was also noted, I was listening to a podcast and they noted that MDMA, many people believe it to have been included in the MK Ultra studies, but it was not. Its parent substance, MDA, was. MDMA was not involved. And those studies involved
someone who died.
Yeah, the MK Ultra studies involved someone. Well, MK Ultra involved testing on people who didn't know that they were being tested, but there was an MDA experiment that was done at New York Psychiatric Institute, and the MDA was given to a man named Harold Blower, who was a tennis player in 1953. And he came to this institution because he had depression. And this institution had permission to be doing these tests on people. And they were giving him MDA about once a week. And he was expressing to them, I don't like this. Like, I don't want to continue being given these psychedelics. He knew that it was happening and he kept expressing that he didn't want it. And they continued doing it. And eventually they gave him 450 milligrams of MDA, which did result in an overdose and killed him.
And then they covered it up.
And they covered it up for a very long time. That happened in 1953, and research didn't continue again until 1969. And in 1969, they continued that research with animals, not with humans. And so today, in the States, MAPS in California, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, as well as Johns Hopkins, are doing research on MDA, or on MDMA, but I'm not sure if many other places in the US are.
I know that Compass is working on psilocybin, but MDMA right now is in the end stages of phase 3 clinical trials and could become a prescription medication
From MAPS. MAPS
like
doing that
next
research,
year.
yeah.
And MAPS is the result of Rick Doblin, who sued the DEA in 1984. So MDMA was initially legal, like legal. Like MDA was illegal before MDMA was illegal. And then in 1984, I believe 1984, the DEA emergency scheduled it. And then a bunch of therapists, doctors, Leo Zeff, Sasha Shulgin, a ton of people, including Rick Doblin, who got college credit for suing the DEA. How lit is that? Like he got college credit because he's. I don't know if it was. I think it was a successful suit. No, well, I don't know if you would call it successful. So basically what happened was the judge who was in charge of it, the judge who was overseeing the case, agreed with them that MDMA has medical potential, as there is some potential for abuse, but it's moderate. and that it can successfully be used under the discretion of a physician, and that it should be placed into Schedule 3, which hydrocodone used to be, buprenorphine is, ketamine is. I don't. Basically, Schedule 3 means it can be not only prescribed, but the doctor can also, they can call it in over the phone, and there can be refills on it. So, yeah, he sued the DEA, and there was a judge, I believe it was Judge Brown, maybe Judge Joe Brown. And yeah, so he agreed, and then the oversight of the DEA, or the head honcho, eventually said no, despite the fact that hundreds of people had written letters. They had successfully argued for MDMA to not be emergency scheduled, and it was emergency scheduled, and then it was unscheduled, and then within a year it was rescheduled again. And to this day, they're going to have to reschedule it once it becomes a legit pharmaceutical. It'd be nice to see it in Schedule 3, but realistically, they'll probably put it in Schedule 2, and it'll probably be, I mean, the way that MAPS is doing it and everything, you can't just go to the pharmacy and just get ecstasy and then go take it at home. You take it with a therapist, and yeah, so I did break it right there, I think.
That's okay. We have a gyroscope we're playing with. So one of the things that I did learn while I was learning about the history of MDMA was that it was one of the first designer drugs, which is where the parent drug of it, MDA, was illegal or scheduled. And at that point, they just barely tweaked it just a little bit, the MDA, to make it MDMA. And as such, MDMA was not illegal, but MDA was.
And so there's substances, mostly substituted cathinones, methadone, methylone, mephedrone, and butylone are the first three that come to mind. And those were widely sold on the internet as MDMA substitutes, which no one could get in trouble for, with the exception of if it was sold for human consumption, which someone could be charged through the Federal Analog Act of 1981. So they would sell it as plant food. In like 2006, you used to see spice being sold at gas stations and head shops and things like that. And alongside that was power pellets and another substance that was emergency scheduled and then was unscheduled was TFNPP, which was emergency scheduled, I think, in like 2000 or something like that. And then after a year, they decided that by itself, it didn't have that much abuse potential.
Well, I'm sure there's a lot more to MDMA that we're not familiar with, but that's what we've got for tonight on MDMA. All right. And then we're also going to go over ibogaine.
So ibogaine is one of the alkaloids from the Tabernathy iboga plant. And the story behind ibogaine is actually really cool. I learned this last year, almost to this day, when I took ibogaine, actually. There was so the history behind it is there was this hunter tribe, the Pyrenees, it started with a P, and they were hunters. They were gatherers. They would look for food and meat and stuff like that and bring it back to the village. and they introduced ibogaine to a bunch of French explorers who brought it back, and it was actually a prescription medication in the early 1900s, I believe, for appetite suppression, fatigue. It was sold under the brand name Lamborghini, I believe, which was near where it was discovered. And so it grows naturally in Ghana and Cameroon, although I believe it's illegal to export it out of Ghana, but not Cameroon. And so there was a hunter whose wife, who he is hunting, and he found, I believe it was like an armadillo or something like that. And he kills it. He brings it back. His wife eats it that night, and she starts hallucinating. And she tells him about it. I believe the man was a shamanic man in the community. And so he goes back to where he found the critter, the armadillo, and he noticed that the armadillo was chewing on this shrub, which was the Tabernathi iboga shrub. And so the animal got the ibogaine and possibly other alkaloids into its system, which the woman then ingested and got it into her system. And so that's how they discovered ibogaine. And so the Bwiti people in Ghana use it for many purposes. They use it for initiations. So when you're like 12, 13, you know, like I'm Jewish, so like I had a bar mitzvah. The Bwiti people, they give their 13-year-olds ibogaine, and they have them trip balls for 3 days. They also use it to contact the dead. They use it for conflict initiation. And so in either the late 60s or the early 70s, there was this heroin addict in New York. His name was Howard Lotsoff. And he was friends with a chemist. He actually participated in a group kind of like Psychedelic Club in New York. And they would get together, and they were like college educated, like pretty intelligent individuals, and they would discuss psychedelics. And so he knew this chemist from that group. And the chemist handed him a vial, which apparently was in his freezer, and he said, "Hey, I've got this African hallucinogen that I think you might enjoy." And he gave it to Lotsoff. And Howard Lotsoff tripped for 3 days. And at the end of the 3 days, he realized that he no longer craved the heroin that he had been addicted to and needed to use every 8, 12, 16 hours without getting dope sick. And so he gave it to 6 or 8 people who were involved in that I'm not sure if they were involved in that organization, but they were also physically dependent on opioids. And I believe the half of them or 3/4 of them stopped using opioids. Lotsoff brought this to the medical community and was pretty much dismissed. The theory, what's up, Peaches? The theory being that the medical community has been working on addiction for hundreds of years. It goes back to the early 1900s with the Towns method, which is actually how AA got, which is how AA came about. AA's founder ingested belladonna. That's what's up, Bride. That's crazy. 10 minutes. No more withdrawals. So, yeah, the 12 steps of AA actually came from a hallucinogenic experience that was the alleged cure-all for any addiction in the early 1900s, which we now know is not the case. But Ibogaine is now used around the world. There are clinics in Canada, Mexico, Costa Rica, the Netherlands, and it's a pretty crazy substance.
I think it's Bird. So Bird mentioned here that DMT helped fix his addiction in 10 minutes and it saved his life with no withdrawals. That's really interesting as well. That's really fucking cool. I am really curious more about DMT as well. I don't know very much history on DMT.
So one of the most notable things that I know about DMT is the guy who studied it, whose name I am now blanking on. Maybe someone will write it in the chat box right now. Wanted to actually study LSD, and because he was in a communist country, Sandoz wouldn't give him LSD because they didn't want this crazy psychedelic substance to be given to they didn't want it in the hands of the communists. And so he eventually, the author of The Spirit Molecule, and so he messed around with DMT. But and one myth that I do know about DMT, everyone claims that DMT is found in the pineal gland. There is a YouTube video by David Nichols, it's like an hour and a half long, I believe, where he discusses why there is not only no proof, but also that it just is impossible. And people do believe that DMT is produced when you are born and when you die and things like that, but there really is no proof to that.
Yeah. I had read a book a while ago, a few years ago, and the person was explaining that they were looking into like how it was first smoked, 5-MeO DMT first smoked from the toad, or like extracted from the toad, and how they knew to do that because people had been doing that prior to chemistry ever even being able to prove that it was in the toad in the first place. So they went all through Mexico looking for like the original source, the original stories, how was it founded, like first, how did someone know to take it from the toad in the first place? And they had said that eventually they came across this tale of a shaman who I believe had been consuming psilocybin mushrooms, and the shaman was told by the spirit of the mushrooms to extract it from the toad. Like the mushrooms told the shaman that there's something beautiful in the toad.
I absolutely believe that.
Yeah.
I mean, that goes along with the theory on Hoffman not actually ingesting LSD.
The first time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's, I really wish that there was more documentation on a lot of the more indigenous use on a lot of these substances. But there's not. That doesn't go to say that they haven't learned everything, like a lot of beautiful things with them. Bird mentioned Rick Strassman.
Yeah, that's the author of The Spirit Molecule. That was, I don't know if that, maybe that was the first person. I mean, he's the most notable who was experimenting with DMT.
He also said, they have actually found it in the brain recently. I smoked mine. It also cured my bad circulation, migraines, and shrank a growth instantly. Whoa. Wow.
So I've seen I've read articles that it may be in like the lungs and I know that they found it in like dissected like frog brains or something like that, but it's my understanding that they would have to dissect a human brain to actually find it in there. And I believe in schizophrenic patients, they've found slight concentrations of DMT in their urine.
Mhm. That's incredible. Okay. And then Dennis had also mentioned in regards to the DMT, it may have something to do with the restarting of the default mode network. Alleviates any kind of negative psychological biochemical interaction between the brain and the body. Huh. That is really interesting. I think that I know myself very well that there are like a lot of parts that the body does to kind of protect itself from the emotional aspect of what the brain is experiencing. And I wonder if DMT may have that kind of like lifting those associations, which would be very interesting. I could see that.
I know that's how ketamine is for me.
Yeah. Huh. Do you know much history on ketamine?
No, I really don't actually. I believe PCP was developed by Parky Davis and used as an anesthetic, and obviously there was a lot of mania and there was a lot of side effects, and I believe that ketamine was developed as an alternative to PCP. The majority of the ketamine that you will be buying off your neighborhood book is actually produced in India or occasionally Mexico, but the majority of it is produced in India. And prior to 2013, it was not a Schedule X substance. I think it's Schedule X in India. And there's no record keeping or anything like that. And I do know that people, the way that they were exporting ketamine was they were buying vials from a chemist. Like they like showed up to this like neighborhood pharmacy guy who like deals with like 20 people a day, and they're like, yo, we need 50,000 vials of ketamine or something like that. He's like, I got 8. Let me order them. And so they show up there and they put them into different vials, which they then sent to other countries, and to get around customs and to get around paying a taxation on it, they listed it as prayer water, holy water. Some I'm not Christian, so some type of holy water. And that was going on for quite some time, and it got scheduled I think in 2013. And now still the majority of ketamine on the streets though is pharmaceutically produced. The majority of it, unfortunately, in my opinion, is also racemic.
What is it? Can you explain that?
There's like two, like there's like basically like a left hand and a right hand of it. And like, let's say your left hand is like the stereoisomer, and then with other substance, there's like the Yevo-isomer. And with ketamine, when it's racemic, it has like 50% of the S, and it's a lot less psychedelic, and it's a lot more of a body high. And if you've ever like really like gone somewhere, like done some ketamine and like flew to outer space, like type of disassociation, that's more from the stereoisomeric version of ketamine. And it's just a little bit more difficult to produce or a longer process. And so generally, basically, if not more, 9 times out of 10 on the street, you're buying racemic ketamine. It doesn't matter what the wook selling it to you says it is. And if they know the chemist, they don't. anyone who goes around telling random people at Red Rocks, at the Fillmore, at Electric Forest, oh yeah, I'm homies with the chemist who made this. If that were the case, they would blab that so quickly to the wrong person, and that person who's a professional, illicit, clandestine chemist would no longer be a professional, illicit, clandestine chemist. They would then be prisoner number 9,065,000. So yeah, anyone who's going to tell you that they know the chemist, I guess there's a few circumstances where that's no, generally, basically, if anyone tells you they know the chemist, this just, and you should never also take anyone at their word. You should always, 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 always test your drugs. Just because someone says that it's A, B, or C, unless it was handed to you by a pharmacist or the chemist who synthesized it, do not take that person at their word.
Dave, if I wanted to test my substances, how would I do that? Where can I get that done?
So there's this wonderful organization called Dance Safe that is conveniently located here in Denver. You can contact their Facebook page. We do have reagents for sale,
Test kits.
and it's very, very easy to do. And I believe Psychedelic Club also offers testing of substances
Completely
for people.
non-judgmental, free, and dependable and reliable. So if you ever need anything tested, anything, reach out to Psychedelic Club. Because chances are you might not know the chemist.
And fentanyl, as William Leonard Picard predicted almost 30 years ago, has now taken over the United States. Thanks, El Chapo. It's being found increasingly in cocaine, methamphetamine. When I was volunteering at a syringe access center, a suburb of Denver, Colorado, had a spike of methamphetamine that was adulterated with fentanyl, and people who were not polysubstance users had been overdosing. So fentanyl test strips, contact DanceSafe, contact Psychedelic Club. You can contact me on Facebook. I have like 500 of them sitting in my quote unquote office.
Thanks, Steve, for appreciating the club. And that's also goes to say as well, like, there are substances that will always be adulterated. So just test for yourself. You know, don't trust anyone. Always test for yourself, and trust yourself, love yourself, keep yourself safe with substance use. All right. On that note,
Know your dose, know your substance, know your source. There's one more. It's like the arrowhead saying, know your dose, know your substance, know your source. Maybe it's know yourself.
does anyone know it? If you know it, put it in the comments. Dose, substance, source.
Okay.
Those are all really good ones, though. Also, he says this is an Arrowhead saying. If you guys are not familiar with Arrowhead, definitely
Know
check
your
them
body,
out.
know your mind, know your substance, know your source. Wow.
Body, mind, substance, source. Those are all great things. All right. Cool. Well, thank you all for tuning in. Was there anything else that you had in mind today?
I don't know. Want to ask me anything?
Are there any questions from the club? Thanks, James. Cool. Self sounds right. Brett says, yeah. All right. Cool. Well, thank you everyone so much for tuning in. I hope that you all learned a lot. I learned a lot in this process, especially about MDMA and ibogaine. That's a really cool story with ibogaine and the armadillo. I'd wonder if armadillos have the right receptors in their brains to get high with ibogaine.
Well, so that's like, I mean, with like most substances that are psychoactive, it's a defense mechanism, and so
Right.
it's to stop an animal from eating it. And so the whole point is for the Tabernacle boga shrub, for when an armadillo starts eating it, then it starts tripping, and then it's like, whoa, like I don't
Eat the
want to
Tabernacle.
keep eating this shrub anymore.
Right. So huge thanks to that armadillo for taking that hit for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man. Okay. Well. All right. If you all liked the video, let us know so we can do another history. Maybe we can look more into the history on some that we haven't talked about, like DMT or psilocybin, ayahuasca. There's a lot of psychedelics out there. So cool. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. Have a good night. See you.